One of the things I tell everybody, if they go out into the forest and they shoot video footage, like especially back then it was VHS tapes. Now it's an SD card. A lot easier to store these than what you did VHS. But I had shelf upon shelf upon shelf of VHS tapes. It was August 2nd of '92. I was out there by myself. I was shooting what they call B-roll footage. I wanted to show, this was before I actually brought anybody in from the Pacific Northwest to show them that we had the woods, the food, water, shelter for a big animal like this to exist. So I'm out there shooting footage of what we now call Sasquatch Lake. I didn't like the position I was at. Turn around, take 4 or 5 steps. I believe it's 4 steps. You can tell by the bounces in the video camera. The camera, I left it running. So it's on my right shoulder. It's facing in that direction. I'm facing in this direction. No knowledge of what's walking down the road up there 100 yards away. I stopped momentarily, turned back around, shoot more footage of the lake, and put the tape on the shelf. A year and a half later, I wanted to get the tape off the shelf and watch an interview I did with a guy by the name of Charlie Hunter out there. I watched that, and it was a cold night. It was December of '93. So I'm watching it. Here comes this video. Here's Sasquatch Lake. There's this thing walking down the road. Just plain as day. And so one thing led to another, and through the process of elimination, we've kind of discovered how tall it is. It was light in color. I wouldn't say it was white, but it looks close to white. It was very quick. It wasn't around for long, a couple of seconds on video, and never seen it again. I wouldn't consider it a sighting because I did not see it with my eyes, but it was there. When Monster Quest came to Ohio and did an episode on the Ohio Grassman, they had a fella in Minnesota take a look at it, and he said, unfortunately, the video was too pixelated, which I agree. I wasn't zoomed in. I was on standard. But to this day, I'll never tell anybody there was a Bigfoot because I didn't see it. But it's something large.
I was never interested or even thought much about Bigfoot or gave it much credence prior, but I was out hiking March 2009, just coming off the winter, March 17th actually to be exact. I had just picked a random trail at a local Ohio park. I was a pretty avid day hiker. Got my backpack on and then started hiking. There wasn't really anything out of the ordinary about that day. I do remember it was 41, 42 degrees out that morning. Real nice blue sky for especially for Ohio. It was maybe 5 to 10 minutes into my walk that I made it down about 300-400 feet down this trail, and I got to this one point in the trail, and instead of going all the way down to the edge of the ridge where this trail zigzagged and went down in a ravine, I decided to go off the trail and step into the wood line. The leaves were real crunchy. I took 2 steps off into the wood line, and as soon as I hit my second step, going into the wood line, something way down in the ravine just took off from left to right. I have never heard anything in the woods make that kind of sound that loud. Made me jump back off the, back onto the trail. I remember pausing there for maybe 30 seconds to a minute, and really didn't think much of it. I've been spooked by quite a few large buck before on trails, and I think I kind of wrote it off, to be honest with you. After about 30 seconds to a minute, I proceeded to, get back out of the wood line and go down to the trail. I get down to the one point on this trail underneath a group of hemlocks where it starts to turn and go down into the ravine. And as soon as I got to this point, back behind me, I heard 3 loud whistles, real loud whistles. They didn't have any inflections in the tones at all. They didn't really even sound like bird sounds. It sounded really a lot like a human whistling. And 9-10 seconds later, right after those 3 whistles, I heard the exact same 3 whistles coming from down in the ravine. It really startled me at the moment. I'm thinking I got 2 sets of 3 whistles. I remember stopping for a little while, and then as I made my way down into the wood line, down the trail, all of a sudden, up on top of the ridge, all the leaves were down because it was March 2009. All the leaves were down about 100, I'd say probably 80 to 100 feet down the ridge. I'm looking downhill as I take my first step, and there's a huge white flash that comes across the top of the ridge. And it startled me. I remember seeing nothing but white in my eyes, and as soon as that happened, I brought my eyes up, and in between 2 trees, this thing stops dead in its tracks. And the immediate thing I thought of right away was Bigfoot. I mean, I hate to say it, that's something I didn't really give too much credence to prior, but that's the first thing that I thought about. We locked eyes for about 12 to 15 seconds. I'll be honest, that's the most scared I've ever been in the woods ever. That one, I don't even know how you describe that to something. It was easily 3.5, 4 feet at the shoulders, and I guesstimate probably close to 8 feet tall, and it was white from head to toe, and it was standing between 2 trees. And the only thing I could think about at that moment was to get back to my truck. And unfortunately, it was between me and my truck, and I actually had to make my way up the trail, back up out of the ravine a little bit, and get up on level ground. And as I was walking uphill and keeping my eyes fixed on it over my left shoulder, as soon as I got up on level ground, it bolted. I saw the first couple steps, and it was gone. That's the last thing I saw ever at that point from that creature. And now I've got 500, 600 foot walk all the way back to my truck, and you're constantly looking over your left shoulder in the direction where you know that creature or whatever it was took off. I ended up proceeding at that moment to start walking uphill because I knew I couldn't go down any farther in the ravine. I had to get back to my truck. That was almost impossible to do because I was so shook up. I was really shaken up at that point. And I remember making it back to my vehicle, and I sat in my vehicle for almost 4 hours, and I called 3 people, including my wife, on the phone. And you're just staring at the wood line for 4 hours, and my legs are shaking so bad at that point because I don't even know how you describe it to somebody. I don't even have the ability to press the brake to turn the key on my truck to go. I'm staring at the wood line for 4 hours and in complete hysterics on the phone with 3 other people, and there for 4 hours just trying to talk me down.
"103 years ago, news columnist Henry Newman covered a sensational story for the Calcutta Statesman, an English-language daily paper founded in 1818. He was reporting an incident during which Lieutenant Colonel C.K. Howard Berry and his expedition party observed large dark forms moving across a snowfield on the Tibetan side of the Himalayan mountains. An imperfect translation, perhaps amplified by Newman's excitement to relay the tale to his readers, resulted in the mysterious figures being reduced to one and called the Abominable Snowman. The Western world was captivated by Howard Berry's account, and as is so often the case, the snowman legend began to take on a life of its own. Details such as the color of the creature in question became malleable in the hands of other writers and artists, and over time, the assumption developed that the abominable snowman must have white fur. Various pop culture iterations of the creature, later known as the Yeti, sealed the deal, especially after Bigfoot burst on the scene and it became a handy visual reference. Bigfoot has black or brown hair, while the abominable snowman has white. Oddly enough, not only does that stance ignore the documented reports, it would seem that those same reports reveal the opposite to be true. The Himalayan Yeti is typically described as having dark or reddish-brown fur, while the North American Sasquatch will, on rare occasions, appear as light gray or white. Incredibly, the state of Ohio has had more than its share of this small subset of Sasquatch sightings. It's worth wondering, why? Why Ohio, and why would there be white-haired Bigfoot at all?
Two things that I can think of offhand would be albinism, albino, or look at the color of what hair I've got left. It's quote-unquote white. 10 years ago, it was mostly brown. I know people who have very light blonde or white hair from not too long after they get out of school until whenever. I'm not that old. I mean, I like to think I'm not that old anyway. I hope I've got another 40 years. In most cases, the older a person gets, their hair changes color from brown or black to white or gray.
Like I said, some people believe it's old age, and I think for one to get to the point it's that old and would have, it's kind of hard for me to fathom. Like with being in a natural environment, I think anything happen, you get like a broken foot or something, it's going to go down. But
one report of white Bigfoot possibly could be elderly. I've read, I don't know whether I've had any myself. I have had reports of white ones, but I've heard of white Bigfoot being seen where they were actually assisted by other ones, which makes me think it was an elderly creature and they were helping it, go up the hill or something like that. I don't recall ever reading about any that may have been true albinos, but that would be another possibility. I have taken reports of, it was Columbiana County, Ohio, of a man seeing a white one and it had hair down over its eyes like a sheepdog. And he got a very good look at it. It was a daytime sighting, and the Bigfoot tried to conceal itself behind these trees. They were small trees, but the leaves weren't out yet, and so the head was still exposed. He could see it very well, and he was excited to hear sometime later that there was a landowner in the same vicinity that had also spotted a white creature, and the lady did report that the hair was down in front of its eyes, which makes us think it was the same creature.
Well, I think it could be old. There's a report of a white Bigfoot in the Willoughby area, Willoughby Hills, near the Chagrin River. It's been seen several times. I suppose you could get an albino version of one, but I don't see any problem with a white Bigfoot. I mean, if it's regular hair and they're similar to us in genetics, we get white hair. They could.
One other factor may indeed be age. Just as human beings, as we age, get gray or white hair, if we are as close on the bush as we think we might be from one species to another, then it seems quite reasonable that an older Sasquatch or Bigfoot might start to exhibit that as a sign of their potential age. Although I don't know necessarily that corresponds to what we have seen white-haired Bigfoot doing, because there doesn't seem to be like an elderly Bigfoot sort of moving very slowly in a rickety fashion here or there as a human might do. The third thing, and this I admittedly is sort of a wild hypothesis, but one that comes to mind, is that instead of necessarily it being white hair, it might be a silver hue, and almost silvery to the point that it would have a mirroring effect on its surroundings and be sort of a cloak of invisibility almost. That it would be able once again to hold still in a certain area, and with that silver cast to its hair that, you know, someone from a distance, if they see it in motion, might interpret as a white covered Bigfoot, could again reflect its surroundings and again be very evasive. That's based on just some speculation and ideas that I've heard other people put forward, but it's pretty fascinating, and it might be a potential explanation in those cases where people have said they've seen like a predator effect. What they might be seeing, in fact, is sort of a reflective hair color. Also, the work of Doug Waller, once again, he's collected some reports in Ohio specifically where the creature's not white, but it's described as like a dishwater blonde. And especially seen at night, and like under a moonlit sky, you might see a dirty blonde Bigfoot walking around and think, oh, it's a white-colored Bigfoot. Maybe, maybe not, but that's one potential, that's something that I think parallels this conversation, is that, you know, if you've got the black hair and the brown and the cinnamon, why not a dirty blonde leading up to even a silver or a white-haired colored Bigfoot? Report number 4558, submitted by Don Keating on Saturday, November 7th, 1998. The sighting took place on Thursday, October 15th, 1998, at 6 p.m. Eastern Time. The location, Guernsey County, Ohio, near a community called Bird's Run. A boy of 12 years of age was squirrel hunting on his parents' property. His parents own over 100 acres of land, which has livestock on it. At any rate, the boy, who we'll call Mike, was sitting just inside the woodline waiting for a chance to get a squirrel. He heard something running towards him off to his right and thought it was a deer. He soon discovered it was a rabbit running through the woods. A moment later, he heard some heavy walking and thought it was a person. It wasn't. What Mike saw was described as between 7 and 8 feet tall, was white in color, and the skin on its hands and face was black. Mike noted the fact that the fingers on the hands were long and skinny. The creature rested one of its hands on the side of a tree. He didn't see the eyes, but that could have been because of bangs hanging over them. He only saw part of the ears. He did see that the head was not rounded, but sloped back to a point. He also said it was fat. It was very bulky from the waist up. Mike saw all of the creature except below the shins. After about 30 seconds, the creature noticed Mike. They had a brief stare down, and Mike finally gave in by running out of the woods, through an open field, and back to the house. As it turns out, Mike was about 35 feet from this creature.
I mean, the only thing I could think would be albinoism. But some people are researchers say, hey, there's no way that can happen, or if it does happen, they wouldn't, thrive. I guess because they'd be picked off and seen easier. But I mean, it happens in other animals. I mean, you can go in the woods and if you watch long enough, sometimes you'll see white deer, you'll see white squirrels, and those are much smaller animals that could be picked off by predators. If these things are what they seem to be, they're an apex predator. The only thing that they would have to fear, basically, if they were a white collar, would be us.
A lot of people have light colored hair. A lot of people have brown or black hair, red hair, blonde. I just think it's just a different hair color for the animal. I don't think there's any set standard that a Sasquatch has to be brown or black in color or gray colored or whatever the case may be. I've heard a lot of different colors that have been reported when people tell me about what they say. I mean, I've had people say, well, you may not believe me, but the thing was almost white. I've actually had a report where I didn't talk to them because they were so scared to death when they left the area. They left all their logging equipment behind. But a person had talked to some loggers in Guernsey County back in the 80s or 90s, thereabouts, who claimed to have seen, it was mainly a white Bigfoot creature, but on the chest hair was all mainly black or dark brown. So why? Oh, well, why does a skunk have black and white hair? Why is an opossum mainly a white colored animal, but it's got shades of gray or brown in it? So it could be because it's albino, or it could be just because of its makeup.
I believe that it's the albinos of all animals, they're there. Again, what makes them any different than any other species? I mean, we've got albinos in the human race. There's albinos in raccoons and coyotes and rabbits, and why not in any other species?
Genetics. You look at humans, we come in all different shapes and sizes. And if a chimpanzee is, 99% of what we are, who's to say that this isn't any different than that? So within a genetic makeup, that having a white and having differences in the species makes it stronger so that they're able to survive and have different attributes. Why can't there be a white Bigfoot?
I think it's probably more to do with, like, my theory's always been it has something to do with melanin, where it's like they're not getting a certain nutrient in food in a certain area that they're getting from other places, and so occasionally one just gets more, loses the coloring in the hair, like when somebody's aging, but like, things like almonds and things help keep your hair like darker, and I think that's probably just a part of what it is. Or you might have someplace I've never heard of one with like, pink eyes or that sort of thing, but maybe it is a form of something like albinoism too. I don't know for sure.
Is Bigfoot, he's growing old, and so as he grows old we get gray hair like the rest of us do? Or are they similar to, say, a coyote, where they're just different shades of color and there's a wide variety? And what we know from biology is that animals in cooler, moisture areas or territories, they tend to be darker in color. But aside from that, it looks like that there's a wide variety of Bigfoot of different colors. So I don't believe that, there's common colors. You hear commonly dark brown, the reddish tint. You commonly hear black, but when those hairs are examined, there's usually a reddish brown tint under them. But I just think that it's a variety that we see with the species. I don't think that there's anything that suggests that we're seeing some type of change as they age.
Yeah, because we have a lot of white Bigfoot reports in Ohio and PA. I think it's just the same as us. Like, people come with different colors of hair, right? Sometimes people wonder if it could be their age, maybe for some of them, but I've taken reports of, one of my favorite reports I've ever taken was one that was 4 foot tall. It was very small. This was in the border of Mahoning and Columbiana County, and it was seen by a wildlife exterminator. He was out culling coyotes, and he saw what he thought then was a escaped primate. He was like, what is this? And why is it here? And he saw it for a good length of time. Finally kind of unnerved him, so he left the area. But he had got a really good look at it. And he said he never thought about Bigfoot, number one, because he didn't really think about Bigfoot, and number two, because it was small and white instead of, 8 foot tall and brown. But later on, when he's, several years later, he started thinking about it and learning more about Bigfoot through some arena, I don't remember why, but then he's like, oh my gosh, maybe that's what I saw. And what's interesting is other people, again, within a couple mile radius, have seen white ones, bigger, smaller, and I just feel like they just have different colors like we do.
I see there's a couple potential factors at work in where you might end up with a white-haired Bigfoot. One of them is perhaps an adaptation that would be related to a place where snow is prevalent. that has occurred in cases where you see like a snowy colored owl or a snowy hare. When they remain still in a snow-covered area, they're almost impossible to see. So in a species that is geared towards evasion and is trying to not be detected, that would seem to be a natural, but then if there's no snow, you're at a huge disadvantage. Now you become extremely noticeable instead. So there's plenty of questions there as well. Whether white-haired thanks to genetics, old age, stealth adaptation, or some other cause, it stands to reason that this eye-catching quality would be found in reports from more than one location. One such location in Ohio is found nestled in Columbiana County, 28 miles south of Youngstown and less than 5 miles west of the Pennsylvania border. Beaver Creek State Park, regarded by many as picturesque and peaceful, boasts historic features such as an old grist mill and abandoned locks, remnants from the canal days. Included in its history is something stranger, a string of encounters with what witnesses can only describe as a white Bigfoot.
My name's Mary Petrella Williams, and I teach at 2 different junior colleges, metaphysics. I'm a graduate of Carlow College in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. All of these experiences happened not far from where we're at here. It's the Beaver Creek area, and I've been living in the Beaver Creek area since the 1980s. So that's a long time. And I've heard some horror stories. However, my story isn't one like that. Actually, the experience that I had was, he was, I say a he, because I just felt that it was a he, but white, grayish, I'm gonna say about 8 to 9 feet tall. We live out in the country not far from here, and our house to the barn is about maybe from where we're standing to the very end of that bridge. So we'd have to walk to feed the animals every night. And so not just myself, but other members of my family, if they were doing feedings, they too would encounter this peripheral vision, large white bipedal animal, and they would run as fast as they could to the house. So it's more than one person, and it was experienced by going to the barn to do feedings. So I can't say that it was really lingering around the house, but it was near the barn, which borders the woods. I never even heard of anything like this, and now I've had other people coming to my little farm, and they too were experiencing this 8-9 foot tall bipedal. And so I called a researcher, his name is Brian Seach, and he came out, did some sort of investigation. I told him my story, and he had told me that a woman in Darlington, Pennsylvania, which would have been about 7 miles from where my place is, also sighted a white Bigfoot. For the detail of it, I've never noticed a smell. However, we always had cows and pigs and horses, but no, I've never can say that I've noticed that. But the gentle, the calm, I've never felt threatened by it. And it would come and go. I honestly feel that I can only say from my experience, they migrate, because this had gone on for over a period of maybe 12 years, but not all the time. They'd be gone for months at a time. And then all of a sudden, again, you would hear them, the howling. You would see them at night. Sometimes you could see the red eyes. Honestly, I feel that where we live, now this is just what I believe, what I think. I could be totally not correct. But I've had people tell me that there is a strong Native American influence where I am, and I've always felt protected, and I felt that it was a guardian of the land. Therefore, it was white, I guess. But I do feel that it was a guardian of the land. You know, I don't know if this is getting off track or not, but there was one time that as we were doing some work on the property, I had an open ditch and doing waterline work. And here, a gentleman who was very unethical, just not a good person, and it was dark out, not very dark, but dark enough where he was just getting ready to pack up and leave. Something pushed him into this ditch, and he was too afraid to get out.
Wow.
I just feel that it was that entity of that Bigfoot, because it, like I said, the children and I spent a lot of time there alone, and never did we heard howling. Now, when we heard this howling, I got to tell you, the hair on your arm and the neck would just stand up, because it's a howl that has the lung capacity of a rhinoceros, and it's just, it will vibrate. Okay, so it would catch your attention. We'd stay in the house type of thing. We never went seeking after it, but so you could hear it, see it, and it was there, but we never felt fear. Right here, they have Bigfoot days in the Beaver Creek area. The Ohio howl. If you want a sample of the howling that I heard, listen to the Ohio howl that's recorded. That is what I heard. That is about 5 to 8 miles from my house where we live.
Yeah, my creature definitely was white from head to toe. When I ran across the top of the ridge, it was one white flash. And when it stopped between the two trees, I had like a 12 to 15 second period to take a quick look at it, but I was pretty much focused on its head. And the one thing I do remember is it wasn't the height, it was the width. I distinctly saw both shoulders. They were covered with white hair, but I couldn't believe when I'm looking at the two trees it was between how wide it thing was. I mean, I would love to have seen a side profile on this thing to see how barrel-chested and wide it was from that angle. Never did get to see that, but the one thing it had was like dreadlocks or long white strands of hair coming down and draping down over its shoulders. So I really, that draped over its shoulders, and that, I was pretty much focused on this area up here. And for some reason, it seems like especially eastern Ohio does have a lot of white Bigfoot sightings. I was always unsure about, it always seems like, a lot of your creature sightings are usually like a red orangutan color, black, or brown. Tend to be like the three predominant colors. White doesn't come up very often, especially I've only come across one other person in the 50 or 60 people plus people that I've interviewed that had a white Bigfoot sighting. And it wasn't too far from my area where I had my sighting. I've got a feeling these things probably cover a much larger bit of ground than most people think they did. At least in Ohio, I think they've got to cover probably several counties throughout the year. That's my presumption, and I think there's certain areas, I think a lot of people, especially in Ohio, are seeing the same creature over and over again. There's been a lot of speculation whether they migrate. I don't necessarily think that they migrate, but I think ranges are probably like 3-4 counties, at least in Ohio. It seems to be like that. And when I had my sighting, there was clearly whistles coming from down in the ravine, so clearly there was a second creature there. That's I think they're traveling in at least a group of 2, maybe 3 or 4 individuals at a given time. I think they're probably very rarely alone. My wife came close to almost having to drive out with somebody to come pick me up because I didn't think I could have to drive the vehicle home because I was so taken back at that point. And that was the end of my encounter. Making it back that day, making it back home was pretty much the end of my sighting for that day.
Report number 8042. The year 1996. The location, Guernsey County, Ohio, on private property located near State Route 662 and State Route 209 near the Indian Camp Road area. The month was October. Just past dusk, while with my hunting partner, we were camped up on the hill above the ravine we bow hunt every year. I went to take a leak at the porta potty we'd set up 100 feet from the campsite. While sitting there with the glare of the campfire in sight, I noticed a really stinky smell coming from behind me. I stood up and turned around to see this animal standing there a short distance away, staring at me. I looked at this thing in amazement. It was leaning on one foot, just looking right at me. I was totally terrified. It was white in color, had dark brown skin, an apparent round head, and real deep-sunk eyes. Although it was about my height, 6'2", it was very wide at the shoulders. I would have to say it was 3.5 to 4 feet wide, which made its waist look thin in comparison. Since I had a shovel to bury my waist, I screamed at the creature and waved the shovel in the air. Once I did this, it sprinted into the woods down into the ravine at an alarming pace. I could hear it busting branches as it left the area. My friend came running over, wondering what was wrong. I told him what had just happened, but he just couldn't believe me. That was until the next day, when we went right to the location and found the large tracks going towards the ravine. I think after him seeing them, he was somewhat convinced I had seen something very unusual. The other thing I noticed was its hair coloring looked dirtier below the waist. My friend and I went to the location the next day and found footprints that were almost 13 inches long. The tracks were much bigger, especially width-wise, than my size 13 Triple E hunting boots. The next day, while hunting by tree stand in the hollow below the sighting location, we both heard noises that went from high to low pitch. It was something we both never heard in our lives. When the property owner found out what I saw, he asked that we didn't hurt them. They mean no harm, which meant they knew they were around. One of the property owners admitted seeing a similar colored creature.
They've been seen throughout the state, but again, the Sasquatch Triangle's had, as far as I've ever noticed, more of a historical background with the White Bigfoot.
All the stuff comes from Coshocton. That's where I hear a lot of stuff on the Bigfoot being white. I mean, that started back in the 90s. And like now, like I said, I've heard of gray, reports of gray, but not exactly white, you know. So, but that's the only place I'm really familiar with hearing of them.
I think there was a report of some being seen in Coshocton County. I can't recall any report where somebody saw more than one at the same time, but there were different reports of white ones being seen, which, you know, could have been the same individual.
On one hand, white-haired Bigfoot really are not prevalent anywhere. No matter where you go, and even in some places like the Chestnut Ridge, for example, that in an offhanded way or in a cursory way might seem to be a place where you could expect to see a white Bigfoot, because you could see anything on the Chestnut Ridge. Even there, the data suggests that those are not common in any way. Like the work of Dr. Paul Johnson, for example, he had a grouping of about 100 reports. He said of those 100 reports, about 96 of those are black, brown-haired. The remaining 4 are white. So proportionally, even in these very weird areas, you've only got 4 out of 100 that may be a light-colored fur color. Having said that, here in Ohio, there does seem to be a place, the Sasquatch Triangle being one, where a lighter fur or hair covered Bigfoot has been spotted repeatedly.
So there are historic reports of white Bigfoot in Woodbury Wildlife Area in Coshocton County, and there are other reports of Bigfoot with white splotches or blotches on its body. My personal opinion about why it is just genetics. You see it in species across the board. It's called leucistic, or albino. Albino is much more rare than a leucistic animal. So you can see a leucistic cardinal, a white cardinal. Here at Salt Fork, we have a population of leucistic groundhogs. So you see woodchucks that are all white or kind of blonde. So it's just a genetic roll of the dice. If there's a recessive trait, something like albinism or what's called hypomelanism, so rather than white animals, all black animals, if that's a recessive trait in a population and two animals carrying that recessive trait mate, there's a good chance that their offspring will have those recessive characteristics. So my opinion would be it's the cosmic roll of the dice as far as genetics go. You have a population that carries a leucistic gene, that recessive trait, and you find a leucistic individual. It happens in the natural world all the time. So that would be my opinion. It's not really an advantageous thing. Most albino animals or leucistic animals get killed very young because they don't have camouflage. But when you're talking about something that probably has a maternal instinct, so there's probably childcare involved, so their young are dependent on a parent for a while. And a relatively large animal can get by with being leucistic. It's not such an issue as it would be if you were, say, a cardinal or a squirrel, a white squirrel. I think it's nothing as far as it's nothing spooky, and it's nothing advantageous on an evolutionary level as much as it is just kind of the cosmic roll of the dice.
And one book that talks about that very openly is Don Keating's The Sasquatch Triangle. In fact, it was Mr. Keating who had repeated sightings of what he saw as a Bigfoot with white hair. And he writes about that in the book. And once again, that Bigfoot wasn't doing anything really out of the ordinary. It seemed to be taking the normal evasive maneuvers that a Bigfoot would have. Perhaps the most famous white Bigfoot in Ohio was captured on film by Don Keating, once again, and he did so inadvertently. He wasn't meaning to even capture a Bigfoot on film, and that's gone through numerous sorts of evaluation. It does seem to be a bipedal creature, and for whatever reason, Keating and white Bigfoot have become linked in a way that I don't know of anyone else who has had that many sightings of a similar creature.
In September of '85, outside of New Coomerstown, just south of the Tuscarawas-Guernsey County line on County Road 33, as you head toward a tiny little dot on the map called Guernsey, Ohio, we had been out there investigating repeated sightings, screams, and the glowing eye incidents. For lack of better terms, on the evening of September 15th of '85, there were 4 of us out there, myself, Tom Archer from Roseburg, Ohio. One of the residents was out there to remain nameless, and another investigator from Northeast Ohio to remain nameless. We had been playing recorded sounds of what allegedly a Sasquatch sounds like. At around 10 o'clock that night, if you know anything about goldenrod weeds, these 4-foot tall things that grow during the fall. They get up to 4 foot tall. One guy was over by an old barn. There was myself and Tom, and then the fourth gentleman who was near us, also he was within eye shot, even though it was dark. He was in that area as well. And the guy who was over by the old barn didn't tell, of course, we didn't know this until later, but he had heard noises coming off the hillside, like heavy walking, heavy footfalls. And a short time later, as we found out, is when I seen something walking towards a chicken pen, and then it stopped for a split second and then walked away, straight away from me, twice as fast as it had come down toward the chicken pen. And what I could tell with what ambient light that I had was that it was a light-colored individual, easily twice as tall as what the goldenrod was, because it appeared as if the waist was above the goldenrod weeds. People say, well, why didn't you take a picture? Well, because I didn't think about it. I mean, I'm there looking for the thing, sure, but I had the camera hanging around my neck with a flash. All I had to do was turn the flash on, and 10 seconds later it could have hit a bunch of shots, but you never think about it. I didn't anyway, because I probably didn't believe what I was seeing. And then jumping ahead to August of '92, when the video of the light-colored individual surfaces, and I discovered it in February of '94. That was a case where I was out in a portion of Coshocton County, Ohio, by myself, no one else, and it was in the Woodbury Wildlife Area, probably about between 5 and 10 miles northwest of the city of Coshocton itself. And that's one of these things where it just happened, didn't know it happened. I was shooting what you call B-roll footage with the camcorder, Gold Star 8:1 zoom on my shoulder. I had shot some footage of what we nicknamed Sasquatch Lake. It wasn't the official name, of course, but we nicknamed these different landmarks for reference points. And I walked away from the lake to get better footage to reposition myself. So I walk away half a dozen or so steps, cameras on my shoulder, pointing up towards, I believe it was County Road 70, Township Road 70. Then I stopped for a split second, turned back around, shoot some more footage. Innocent enough, right? So a year and a half later, and this is why I always preach to people, never, ever, ever tape over your footage that you shoot out in the country or anywhere else. So a year and a half later, I'm sitting at home on a frigid, cold night, pulled this tape off because I wanted to watch an interview I had done with an elderly gentleman earlier in the film. I let the film roll, and to my shock, there's this thing walking down the road from right to left. And it only lasted a couple of seconds, and I probably replayed it 100 times that night, just looking at it to see if I was imagining things. The one that I suppose holds the greatest possibility of being legitimate, the authentic, the real thing. There have been a few people, a few groups come out and say, no, it was this, and no, it was this. Yeah, but you haven't proven to me how it was this or that. You know, if you're gonna prove to me you have a $1 million winning lottery ticket, and you expect me to pay you the $1 million, I want to see the ticket first. I want to see that it's actually real. So you'll never hear me say that that piece of footage contains a live, breathing Sasquatch creature. But what you will hear me say is it contains something extremely tall and extremely fast, because we were able to determine that it covered about 28 feet in 2 seconds in 4 steps. That's moving. And the bushes that it walked past in the background, myself and another man by the name of Daniel Perez from California, we were able to determine that it was probably 9 foot tall, if not taller. And here's a guy who, you know, Perez is very meticulous with his research, and I tried to be. And here's a guy who is all the way out here, and we're doing these measurements, tape measure the whole 9 yards. It walked past 4 fence posts that were 48 inches high on the average. And the waist of this thing appears above the fence post. And consider the fact that once you walk past the fence post to the road, as you're looking at the fence post from where I was shooting the footage, you're shooting kind of up terrain. So once you get to the fence post, it levels off, and then on the back side of the fence post toward the road, it drops down a few feet. The reason you point that out is because of the fact that whatever it was had to be very tall for its waist to be above these 4-foot high fence posts. Because if it was like my height, the waist would have been a lot shorter. In fact, we had a fellow who was 6'9" walk down the far side and the near side of that road with a very light blue bed sheet over him, you know, just try and get an idea. Didn't come anywhere near it.
Report number 6062. October 1986, near Portsmouth, Ohio. I was in high school in 1986, and we just came home from an away football game and were cruising around town late one night, about 12:30 or so. My friend was driving and my other buddy was in the back seat in the middle. I was riding in the passenger seat. After riding around for a while, we decided to go to the other side of town and took a shortcut on the very curvy Timlin Hill Road. The area has some nice homes and has a huge old monastery at the top of the hill that was abandoned a few years earlier. So you can imagine the ghost stories that emulate from such a place. It's still well kept and was a popular makeout spot for area teens. It overlooked Portsmouth and was at the top of a hill-like region. Anyway, just at the entrance to the monastery are well-lighted streetlights that provide more than ample light. We were turning a sharp corner at the bottom of the hill and started to the top of the hill towards the monastery when we turned the corner and saw a thing sitting in the middle of the road, all crouched down. When it saw our car, it arose and took 3 large steps and leaped over and down the hill. My friends and I said nothing until we got to the other side of the hill. I finally had to say something and turned to my friend driving, and he was almost crying. My friend in the back was in total disbelief of what we had just seen. We went back, going about 100 miles an hour, but obviously that thing had vanished. Later that night, we went back with a few more people and saw where some branches were broken. I had never been a believer in Bigfoot, but the thing I saw was something I cannot to this day explain. I was about 17 then, now I'm 34, and still recall vividly how that night was, when I didn't expect to encounter this thing. It was slender, tall, and had fur hanging off of it. Its arms swung down past its knees almost. It took 2 to 3 steps and leaped over these reeds that were at least 4 foot tall. It was almost like it was warming itself under the lights and the warmth of the pavement. The witness added that it stood up from a crouch with its hands by its side. When it moved, it took large steps with its arms swinging. It jumped over the reeds into the brush and was out of sight. The witness estimates that this thing was between 5'10" and 6'1", with a very skinny build. It was light gray or silver in color with white streaks. They witnessed the creature for 3 to 5 seconds. As Bigfoot researchers sift through data such as sighting reports, they look for patterns that warrant further investigation. In the course of research, some have identified behavioral patterns that appear to vary by region. These patterns can be read to suggest that in some parts of the country, Sasquatch act in a more aggressive manner toward humans, and in other locations exhibit a relatively docile attitude. Depending on the level of detail involved in a given account, additional factors can be considered that may help explain or illustrate the activity of Bigfoot. Could the color of hair or fur be one of those factors?
Is there a difference in the behavior of white Bigfoot versus other Bigfoot?
I've never personally experienced it, but through some of the reports I've read throughout they're a little more aggressive, and show less fear. But that's only through reports.
They don't seem like it. The couple that I've taken, the same thing. They're swaying back and forth. Well, the one, other than the one, the gentleman, stated that this thing swayed back and forth and then started to, I guess, say chase him, bluff him, on all fours. That was the only difference. I mean, I've not really taken many of those, even with actual sightings. People talk about being bluffed through the woods and don't see these things, but actually taking a bluff charge report, I've not really taken many of those except for that white one.
Every report that I've heard of them, they're not staying in an area. They just want to get, like if they're spotted, they're trying to get from point A to point B, and that's it. So that's all I've heard about the difference. There's no real difference in them.
I remember talking to a witness, and there were areas where there were some that were really bad-tempered. Several people had mentioned that, and the one he saw wasn't that way. It was pretty much he saw it and it saw him, and they both turned and went their merry way. But some of these nasty ones were very, supposed to be very aggressive.
I think Bigfoot is like a human. We all recognize each other as being human, but our behaviors are largely all consistent between all the different people in the United States. 80% of what we do or 90% is probably the same on how we eat and how we go to the bathroom and how we sleep and that type of thing. But there may be people that are vegetarians, or maybe people that like to stay up late, and other people are morning things. But I think that in general, that with any species, you would expect to see a commonality in almost everything.
People have seen the white ones like hopping up and down a little bit, like whether they're, there's something that they're trying to eat or whatever. But that's one thing that we talked about. Nothing really different than that. That's the only thing that somebody mentioned. There were more than one story with them doing that, and that they seem to be, a lot of the people called them, that they said that they look like Cousin It, but I wonder if that's just because the lighter color, you can see the hair formation better than if they were darker colored.
A white colored Bigfoot does not seem to present any noticeable behavioral differences. I'm not aware of any in which they act more aggressively. I'm not aware of any in which they act like an elderly member of the human population. It does seem that they, in the case of the aforementioned White Bigfoot video that was obtained by Don Keating, there you have a rather large white Bigfoot, presumably moving across the screen fairly rapidly and fluidly. So it does not seem to be at all hampered by age or some other physical defect that it might possess. So I'm not aware of any real differences in how they would behave or act.
Let's take a hypothetical, for example. The hypothetical would be the August 2nd, 92 film that I shot with the thing walking down the road that takes 4 steps in 2 seconds, and the steps are 6.5 to 7 feet apart, and it's between 8.5 and 10 feet tall. We've discovered that through scientific methods, gone out there for laser and 2 8-foot 2x4s bolted together. Take that as an example. The thing had no reasoning whatsoever to stop and say hello to me. I didn't know I captured it on tape for 1.5 years, but whatever or whoever it was looked in my direction. There's no question about that. That being the case, it was hightailing it out of there. Now, on most sighting reports, this animal has no want, no need, no desire to interact with humans, unless they hear what they think are children playing or a baby crying. And there have been reports where a creature has been curious enough where it is seen to observe children playing. One lady told me back in January of '89, I took John Green out to meet her, that she had a baby that was in a crib underneath a window in her mobile home. This was on 410, right near Wills Creek. And her child was crying. She went inside the bedroom, tried to calm it down, turned the light on, like was the Salt Fork Ranger Station. She looked out the window and there was a creature standing there, apparently looking in the window down at her baby, out of apparently pure curiosity or Could you go as far as to say as because there was a motherly instinct if it was a female? Who knows?
My wife had always been interested in the subject, so she was totally enthralled by what I had seen 3 days prior. So she basically had to drag me back out to the area, and my kids were off school that day, so we made it like a day trip. Took a bunch of food with us, took the kids along with us, and we ended up going to the trailhead just like I had parked 3 days earlier with all 4 of us. Got out of the car, didn't hear anything, didn't see anything, nothing was out of the ordinary. We start making our way back down the trail to get to the area so she could measure, how far away the creature was, how many feet across the top of the ridge it covered. And we make our way about a third of the way down the trail, and we see this huge footprint, obvious footprint, in the mud on the way down the trail. And I got to tell you, it was probably the most unnerving thing, because I told my wife, I said, it's still here. I said, this looks incredibly fresh. And it did. It looked like it was definitely done that day. I got a really good picture of it with my foot next to it. It's fairly large. But she eventually dragged me back down in the woods, had to talk to me pretty much the whole way to keep me occupied, because I'm looking over my shoulder left and right all the way down. We're down there for about 15 minutes. Nothing happens on the way down other than seeing that footprint. I'm down there 15 minutes helping her with tape measure and stuff, measuring the area. I told her I was maybe the second or third panic attack I think I've ever had in my life. I said, you got to get me out of here. I said, I can't go any longer. And she went along with it, and we started walking the way, about a third of the way back down the trail. And there in the middle of the trail is this big green slimy pile of scat that was not there on the way down. I went over in my mind, definitely does not look like bear scat. Doesn't look like any other scat I've seen, and it had white hair, almost like the wind cover. And it actually looked like rabbit fur, white rabbit fur that was in the hair. And it was green slimy, not real big, and I told my wife, I said, we came down this area. I said, any four-legged creatures, you're going to disturb. They're not going to hang around when you go through it, but humans typically go through an area. I'm like, there's no way one of us, if we hadn't seen it, one of us 4 would have surely stepped in us. There's no way we could have missed it on the way down. It was smack in the middle of the trail. And I'm starting, my panic attack at that point is just getting worse, and I just started bolting towards the truck. I pretty much left them in the dust, and they're trying to catch up with me, and I make my way up and get to the point where the footprint's at. And there's a pile of sticks there. Well, I call sticks. They're about 5, 6, 7 feet long and about 16 to 18 inches high, blocking the trail next to the footprint, probably within 2-3 feet of the footprint, that were not there on the way down. I told my wife, I said, something clearly with hands just placed this here while we were down the trail measuring the area. I said, that thing is somewhere out in the woodline, either playing with us or just toying with us, or at that point I didn't know what to think, and I bolted to the car, to the truck. And I tried to dissuade her from doing anything else, and I said I just had to get out of there. And I asked her, I said, what are you planning on doing? And she's like, I'm going to get one of the apples we brought for our kids. She goes, I'm going to go down there and put the apple right next to the scat. She goes, we're going to come back in about 45 minutes to half an hour to an hour, and we're going to see if anything disturbed that apple. She comes back out of the woods about 10 minutes later. We waited about an hour. She goes bolting back down into the woods. I'm watching the kids. She goes down there, takes a picture, and we got a picture of the area. It's about 2-3 feet wide, where it's all bare, and you can clearly see that the leaves have been lifted out. Something had picked up the apple. There's no remnants of the apple any place. Scat was 100% gone. We looked all over for the scat, and there's this big, dry area where the leaves have been clearly picked up. And there's no remnants of the apple, nothing's there. I told my wife, I said, what just runs off with its own scat? I said, something clearly picked up its own scat. And the more we thought about it on the way home, and I've talked about this before, leaving the scat there, probably a good way of telling you to get out of my area. At least that's what I'm thinking. And on the way home, we discussed, I'm thinking, at that time, I didn't think about what the 5, 6, 7 foot branches across the trail probably meant or what they did. And we thought about on the way home, it's blocking you to say, I don't want you down this trail. I don't want you here. And the more we thought about it, I'm like, that clearly lines up with dropping a pile of scat or, doing some other things. And I'm kind of thinking sometimes that's probably why they do what they do. Amongst, the times I've had rocks thrown at me as well. So that's pretty much the end of that. And then, for 2 months after that, we had rocks thrown at us, branches being twisted and wrenched, rotated 180, 360 degrees, and we found them all over the place. And, after that, after about 2 months, we had pretty much no activity. It was almost like nothing was even there. Found multiple footprints, and you're like, where to go? But clearly they travel up and down the river systems, most likely. That's what I'm kind of presuming. Especially after somebody else saw mine downriver from where I had my sighting. So clearly they travel a good distance, I think. Everything about my encounter was very factual, very earth-based. I saw something running across the top of a ridge that didn't, could it have hidden itself better? It moved too fast while I was hiking and going down into the ravine at the time. I've told many people that it should have waited probably another 15, 20, 30 seconds for me to go deeper into the ravine, and I probably would have never seen this ice. And it moved too fast at the moment. And if you're capable of not being seen, which I know a lot of people have proposed, why was I able to see without any problem? And I've talked to one other individual that I know close to my sighting area that's definitely seen the same creature that I have multiple times on her property. It's clearly the same creature. She's about 1.5 miles downstream from where I have my sighting on her private property, and she describes the creature exactly the same way as I do. And it's clearly the same creature. For me, I definitely suffered PTSD or something close to it for 4 to 5 months probably afterwards. It would not be uncommon for me to get up at 2, 3 a.m. and go take a cold shower. That was very common for me. And I'd be in a cold sweat. And I don't know how you describe that to somebody, because I've told some people, I think if I had to describe the fear that I had that day, because it takes you so off guard, it's probably close to, you can take me on safari and drop me by a helicopter in the middle of a private lines, and I think I would have felt the same exact way. It traumatized me. It really gives you quite an emotional response. I've had other people that responded close to the same way. They have told me they don't really talk about their encounter any longer, because it just disturbs them. Because it's, unfortunately, at least for me, it's right there in the front of your head all the time. It completely turned what I thought was real and not real upside down. Part of it was the fear of seeing something that large in the woods, which I normally walked all over Ohio. I can't tell you how many thousands of miles I've hiked over a decade prior to that. Did I ever come close to something like that before and I didn't notice something? You kind of think that in the back of your head sometimes. You're kind of like, how many times was I in the woods and I might have been close to something like that, and of course I just didn't see it. And that one for me is, it turns your world upside down. At least it does for me.
There's something about the image of an elderly, silver-haired Sasquatch that strikes a sentimental chord, whether one believes in Bigfoot or not. It's almost comforting to imagine the old man of the woods, carefully keeping to the shadows, standing guard over the natural world. Chances are there are more pragmatic reasons for light-colored Bigfoot to exist, with demonstrable variations in other species. Whatever the explanation, the unassuming, surprisingly wild state of Ohio continues to be a setting in which Sasquatch are observed apparently across their lifespans. Here's hoping the land is wisely stewarded to support all life in Ohio for ages to come.